You, my guardian angel, take my soul of fire. In this game,
you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the deeper messages, symbols, and predictive programming subtext that underlie modern film. In this show, we will be interviewing artists, experts, and numerous people in media fields. And this will all be based on my years of research in comparative religion, propaganda, psychological warfare, secret societies, and espionage. Esoteric Hollywood decodes the biggest movies in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with completely new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. Tonight, it's going to be me breaking down the Hunger Games. You're listening on talknetwork.com. Got a packed week this week. We're going to have some interviews with the Collins brothers, authors and writers whose work can be found at conspiracyarchive.com, as well as former Assistant Housing Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts. We're going to be talking about the black budget, Hollywood predictive programming, and movies that she sees that reveal quite a bit about what's really going on in the world. But tonight, as I said, we're going to be breaking down the Hunger Games quadrilogy, which the final installment of that series premiered, I believe, last weekend. And I read the first book and then kind of got busy with other books, and it was enjoyable. I learned some interesting things, saw some things, and but I got too busy to finish all of that trilogy in the last several years with all kinds of different projects. But there is actually quite a bit of symbology at work in the Hunger Games series. Quite a bit of, I guess we could call predictive programming or dystopian presaging. Who knows? I mean, I don't have any reason to think that Suzanne Collins herself is any kind of agent or anything per se. She could be, I don't know, but certainly the phenomena has been, I would guess, $1 billion franchise now since 2008. So within 7 years, Hunger Games has gone from a trilogy that successively came out in 2008, 2009, and 2010. And then we have the movies that were split up into 4 segments. And those in total, there's just no telling, it's probably a $2 billion franchise. I don't know, I'm guessing. But certainly the movies alone are $1 billion franchise movies, but in total. But for those that don't know, the series follows, it's a dystopian future where the United States, or I guess North America, is divided up into sections that are called districts. And so the new country is no longer America, but Pan-America. And that brings to mind the Pan-American Union, the North American Union, which is actually a real plan, the real strategy that we've seen, for example, put into effect in the EU with the early Bilderberg meetings from the 50s that would call for an economic union, and this would become the EU. And you can see those early Bilderberg documents that I have in articles I've written at jaysanalysis.com, where you type in Bilderberg at the search, you'll find those articles. And you'll see that back then that they planned that the economic union would eventually turn into the European Union, not just a common market, but also the attempt to kind of create this super Soviet. And that's all planned and strategized in older Bilderberg documents 50 years before anybody knew about the announcement of the EU in the 90s. So as you can see, these kinds of things go into effect, into planning decades ahead of time. And according to those older Royal Society plans for the continents, the plans have always been to put things into continental trading blocks. Now, if you heard my recent interview with Tim Kelly, Tim and I got into this where I quoted from Tragedy and Hope by Dr. Carroll Quigley, who was Bill Clinton's mentor and one of the Georgetown professor, and also wrote a big book that was kind of the guiding light of CIA operatives back in the 70s. They would read this treatise. Very big, fat geopolitical tome that pretty much spills all the beans on how real geopolitics is run and how the banking establishment has pretty much run the globe through the economic currency scam of fiat dollars and gold notes, leading to fractional reserve fiat banking that's been in play for the last couple hundred years. And then with the rise of the 20th century being the century of war, with World War I and World War II, we get the League of Nations and the United Nations, and then successively we get the Bretton Woods economic system and the Bank for International Settlements, which puts everything under the dollar as the Pax Americana economic force for creating so-called stability in global finance. That's more or less the background to Suzanne Collins' novel, where we have, and I don't think we're told exactly where in the future this takes place. It's an unspecified future in a dystopian post-apocalyptic nation of Panem that are built. It's built on the ruins of North America. Interestingly, the country consists of a wealthy capital that's located near the Rocky Mountains, and then 12, and then formerly 13 poorer districts that are ruled by this capital city. The capital is this very lavish, luxurious, and ultimately degenerate bunch of ninnies and pimps and sissies that sort of run around wearing too much makeup, looking like something from a 1980s workout video. Now, the districts underneath the capital exist in varying states of poverty, and we learn that Katniss, played by J-Law, Jennifer Lawrence, Katniss Everdeen lives in District 12, the poorest region of Panem. And this is kind of near the Appalachian Mountain area, not too far from, I guess, maybe Tennessee, Kentucky-ish area, maybe. But regardless, the Katniss, we see early on, has to hunt, right? But the capital city has put in a mandate that you can't hunt. There's no hunting. Everything has to be done according to the mandates of the bureaucratic rules of the capital. So they very much live in a kind of, I guess what we could say, a green agenda nightmare, right? So it's a future where you don't have private industry, you don't have anything that you can do because everything's regulated. So the state comes in, the capital, and they regulate everything, and you're not allowed to do anything. And what this does is that it keeps everybody in very base level poverty. Not exactly communist per se, because people in the capital are very wealthy and live very lavish lifestyles, but everybody else just kind of has to suffer. If you're not part of the inner coterie of those around President Snow, played by Donald Sutherland. Now, in Katniss's district, people regularly die of starvation, and we learn that there was a previous rebellion that the capital has propagandized into calling the Dark Days, and this was that 13th district that was purported to be destroyed. And then as a result of this rebellion from District 13, the capital got the idea to institute the sort of Roman gladiatorial human sacrifice games of ancient times that they call the Hunger Games. And then so every year, each of the districts puts up a pledge selected purportedly by a lottery, who are in the pledges or the tributes then will battle till the death in this huge manufactured dome, Truman-style arena, where the environment can be completely manipulated and somewhat of it's almost a torture thing. So think of a high-tech American Gladiators version of like the Roman. Think about American Gladiators on acid with real weapons and not big, not big foam swords or whatever. Now, as a result, the winning tribute, then their district is rewarded with food, supplies, and some measure of wealth. So you kind of battle, kill everybody, and you get the loot, you get the booty. So the purpose then of the Hunger Games is to provide bread and circuses, right? So it's to give everybody the impression that the capital can serve their needs, and the capital is this beneficent, benevolent blessing that can dole out, treats and goodies when you serve the capital and sacrifice your children to it. Well, this is nothing new. This is what centralized satanic states in the history of the world have done, is offer your firstborn, and Big Daddy State, who is the march of God on earth, according to Hegel, will bless you with goodies, a chicken in every pot, a plate of dainties from Woody Harrelson. Now that's the background here, and what's interesting to note here is that when you look at everybody in District 12, this is the coal mining district. Everybody's kind of it looks kind of like a communist concentration camp, right? Everybody's completely poor, living in shacks. They don't even have electricity anymore. It's gone. Only the capital has electricity, as far as we can tell, and so you're just living in abject base poverty. You're fighting pigs for scraps of soggy, moldy bread, as Katniss does, and you're wearing your communist workers' outfit, right? So certainly a future that appears to be influenced by collectivism and communism. So there's no question in my mind that plays a role in this. And I believe Suzanne Collins professes to be some kind of Catholic or something. So perhaps religious views influence her in some degree. I don't know, but that's our background here. And so you're going to get the reaping, which every year they're going to choose these tributes between ages 12 to 18. If we stop and think about this kind of sounds like our world, doesn't it? I mean, it's not just a dystopian future, but aren't we sending our young guys over to die as heroes in these fraudulent wars? Aren't they our tributes? I think so. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and I'm your host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. Stay with me. We're deconstructing the Hunger Games. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and I'm deconstructing the Hunger Games. And we were talking about how the Hunger Games really has a lot of parallels, not just to the green agenda and the idea of sustainability, right? This is what the capital really enforces on the rest of the districts, is this austerity, basically. This is what we hear the bankers calling for, is complete and total austerity. And implementation of sustainability in the green agenda via entities such as the UN. And we tend to think, at least duped idiots do, simps and marks out there who believe that they're activists, they tend to think that when they sign up for working for, say, PETA or Greenpeace or these different groups, or animal rights, they tend to think that they're fighting the system and they're going to cut down on corporate greed, and most of the time these people are immediately corralled into the green movement in some form or fashion. And we've seen this as an advertising extravaganza, just really a marketing PR thing explode in the last 20 years. Green this, green that, green, green, green. And really what it is a corporate marketing strategy. It's a business plan. It's an advertising scam. And it's not to do at all with the environment. And most of the things that are supposed to be green really don't mean anything at all. Like, oh, I'm going to buy green toilet paper. I eat at a green restaurant. Well, what does that even mean? And as I said in previous talks when we did the episode on Snowpiercer, the green agenda is really about attack on carbon. And an attack on carbon is not about CO2s, it's about an attack on humanity. It's about getting rid of man himself. Now, that's the dystopian future that we see in Hunger Games. It's a future where, as we said, you don't have the ability to engage in individual commerce. You can't go hunt and fish. You can't grow your own stuff. You're at the mercy of Big Daddy welfare state, and that's centered around a fuzzy, furry, Santa Claus-looking Donald Sutherland in the capital city, surrounded by a bunch of weirdos that look like RuPaul. Now, why is this in here? Well, I do think that it's a great insight that Collins has in her work here, that the danger really can be a centralized authority that's going to tell us what the environment is, who is bad for the environment, how economics needs to be completely restructured around this neo-feudal model based around the Club of Rome and different think tanks. And when you look at these think tanks, they're the ones churning out this baloney about how it's all resource war. There's not enough space for humans on Earth. Humans are a disease and a parasite on Mother Gaia. They're like a cancer on the planet, which is an organism supposedly alive, and humans are the cancer. And because cows put out too much flatulence, and there's holes in the ozone layers there's a hole in the ozone layer supposedly, which is going to fry everybody by now, which has not happened. If you lived in the 80s and 90s, then I'm sure you heard about the hole in the ozone layer that was going to kill everybody by now. Oh, and we were supposed to be drowned by the polar ice caps melting. You stop and think about how ridiculous that is. That a few ice caps, a few miles of ice caps melting, would result in the entire sea rising. This is just completely preposterous. No, it's all not true, by the way. Of course, polar bears can't swim. Inconvenient truth from Al Gore. Total baloney. And yet the millions of dupes that believe this stuff, just millions and millions and millions, billions of dupes that believe the baloney. And this is the future that we see in the Hunger Games. A completely tyrannical, dictatorial, imperial power that runs everyone's lives down to the smallest minutia through bureaucratic fiat. And so we see a little bit of rebellion on the part of Katniss at the beginning, where she actually goes and hunts anyway. She doesn't care about these bureaucratic rules. She's going to go and hunt and get a deer and maybe a rabbit or something because, well, they're hungry. And when you're hungry, you're not really worried about the local commissar's bureaucratic rules. So Katniss will be this symbol. She will be this bird, this mockingjay, this phoenix, this fiery flame emblem of what we will discover is la révolution, the revolution. Every dystopian story, you got to have the authoritarian leaders and imperial control structure, And then you got to have the resistance. There's always the resistance. Now, you might think, well, that sounds pretty archetypal, pretty cookie cutter, pretty same old, same old. Actually, there's going to be some pretty insightful elements to Hunger Games with a little more philosophical, geopolitical depth and sophistication beyond what we tend to see in this overly used plot line. So I do have to be fair and admit that overall I enjoy this series. It's not bad. It doesn't have bad messages, and it really does seem to tell us, especially since this is a young adult novel, right? This is geared at, I guess, teens and tweens. We're really seeing quite a bit more than we typically would see in something like this. If you saw the rip-off series like Divergent, which was roughly along the same lines as this series, and then I'm sure there's a million other series that could be comparable to this, Maze Runner type thing. And I'm not saying those are all bad either, but what I'm saying is that we really do see some sophistication here that I will go into. Now, so televised child sacrifice. This sounds pretty far out and crazy. We would never see such a thing. But, how far are we from something like this? Right? We've already seen these Planned Parenthood videos of what purport to be the Planned Parenthood people talking about their willingness to, cut up infants and sell the parts for lab testing, et cetera, et cetera. And they have no qualms about this. Ancient empires had no qualms about killing the population off, especially infanticide. This is mentioned explicitly in Plato's Republic, Book 5, which I engaged in a pretty furious debate with some people over this last week. And so this is nothing new, right? And if it's nothing new, and it tends to be a feature of empires past, there's no reason to expect that we are beyond this and we are morally superior, and to be self-righteous about this notion, to justify ourselves and think that, we don't live in that kind of an era where there's all this brutality and savagery. We live in an enlightened, post-enlightenment era, and we are progressive, and we've progressed beyond these things. No, in fact, there are networks of pedophiles, as we saw with Savile. There are networks of child sacrificers, Planned Parenthood, and these things are instituted, supported, and funded by big central capital daddy state. Nanny state, mama state, daddy state, big brother. And when we look at these entities like State Department Memorandum 200, this is Kissinger, Carter administration talking about depopulation decades ago. When we look at Planned Parenthood documents discussing Bernard Burleson, I believe was the document from 68 or 69 that I mentioned many times, that discusses promotion of homosexuality, promotion of the destruction of the family, and so forth, to ultimately curb population. We see that the white papers are explicit about this. So what's across the board, whether it's Planned Parenthood or whether it's the Rockefeller Foundation, which funds that, whether it's the Gates Foundation, whether it's Club of Rome, or whether it's BP and Shell, where's Warren Buffett give his money, what we see across the board is get rid of the humans, and that's the unified agenda here. 100% across the board. That's what ties all of these things together, whether it's sustainability, what the so-called New World Order. That's what it's ultimately about. And it's not hard to, that's the New Age movement, so-called, right? That's what always ties into some kind of earth worship, to spirits of the earth, etc. And that's the real danger. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and we're breaking down Hunger Games. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. I want to remind you, if you want to get the best kind of mushrooms that you can get, and I'm talking about edible mushrooms, particularly the chaga mushroom, which is great for tea and coffee. You can make a great tea and coffee out of this. This is actually something that Russians know about. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about the chaga mushroom, and its the effects that he believed were very advantageous to the human system. Go to michiganmushrooms.net, and if you put in the coupon code there, JAY, me, they will give you a discount. 10%, I believe, 10 or 15% on any order that you place, and that lets them know that jaysanalysis.com is worth their support. So definitely check out michiganmushrooms.net, and also for all of your other health needs, check out j.talknetwork.com. That's where you can find everything from organic supplements to immunosystem boosters, you name it. Mike Adams has a lab where he personally tests these items to make sure that they're free of any contamination. That's j.talknetwork.com. We're talking Hunger Games, and I've been breaking down the well-placed themes of Agenda 21, sustainability, green, scam, hoax, climate, blah, blah, blah. All of that does seem to play into the Hunger Games. And so as we said, we have these 12 districts living in total poverty under the tyranny of the capital city, run by a fluffy Donald Sutherland playing President Snow. And then this decadent, depraved capital city really saps off the wealth of everyone else. That's what's going on here, right? So we might be tempted to say, oh, well, this is a communist movie. No, not really. It's not, because as we're going to learn, the revolution is not all it's cracked up to be. This is what I'm identifying as the great philosophical insight in this film, is that most people buy into revolutionary leftists movements, equality, we're fighting for the people, socialism, blah, blah, blah. And they don't ever think to look at who's behind that movement. Where did it come from? Who gives the left movement its money? And I'm not just talking about Democrat versus Republican. I'm talking about any kind of leftist political cause or so-called right political cause. Always know where they get their funding and who are the key players in those organizations. Now, so we've talked about this decadent capital and President Snow, and it's very much an imperial power. So we're using this older imperial mythos, the idea of the Pax Romana, the Pax Americana, and in hundreds of years in the future, the ruins of North America, we have Pan Am. So now Katniss and her band of poverty pals are getting tired of this ritual that they go through of having to have children from their district chosen to go fight in the Hunger Games. And it's this very sickening thing, and it's broadcast across the entire nation, or globe, I guess, or country, or we don't really know, but it's the capital sends this out everywhere, and everybody loves it, and everybody gets into it. Very much like Running Man. It's basically the same theme as Running Man, so not really a new idea here with this. There's also other films that have done this same theme before. Battle Royale, I believe, Japanese film. So nothing new, but there are some, as I said, some good political philosophy twists that Suzanne Collins will throw in. And what have empires always done? Well, when there's not really an external threat, what does the empire do? Well, the empire creates the boogeyman. So be that revolutionary movements or terrorists, right? That's what we're going to see again here in Hunger Games. The motivation of the empire, because of the peace, is to always keep people occupied with false threats. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, right? Creations of the empire itself. And then this gets everybody thinking, well, there's the enemy out there. It's us versus them. They believe then in the state mythos even more. And then to alleviate the tensions and the psyops that the system foists on the public to keep them in fear, the system also offers from its left hand you get fear and terror, and then from the right hand, Daddy State Empire gives you your bread and your circuses, your entertainment. And that's what the Hunger Games are. So just as decadent as any other society, willing to give over their young people to fight in this meaningless battle. Sounds like the foreign policy of America. Now, interesting scene. The capital city at the lottery, the choosing of the tributes, the Capitol plays a propaganda video. And it looks like something you see on Fox News. It looks like, America, America, oh yeah, coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah, America. That's the Pan Am propaganda video. It's like, in our history, District 13, the rebels rose up to destroy our peace. They hated our freedom and our way of life. And so, the Capitol, put down the rebellion, and as a tribute, every year, in celebration of peace. It's almost like you got to give the people the bloodshed, right? To give them the release that, oh yes, we've killed people so we can be safe. We feel safe now. We've shed some blood. We have safety. And that's what's going on with the propaganda video. It's very over the top, which I enjoyed that aspect of it. And so the state here, they bought peace for the people, they say. We purchased peace at a heavy price through putting down the traitors, the rebels and the terrorists. Right? Who are the rebels and the terrorists? Well, it's always the people who are going against the state, and most likely probably created by the state, at least in the real world. So the state gives the problem as well as the solution. And so what we see from everybody who is a part of this, except for Katniss and a few people, and people rumbling over being hungry and in poverty, they're getting tired of this. They're getting tired of the tributes. They're getting tired of sacrificing their people, and so they decide that there's eventually going to be a final straw, right? And so what happens is Katniss's sister, Primrose, who's too young, she's like 12, right, is chosen in the lottery. She's the youngest, or one of the youngest they're chosen, and Katniss freaks out and offers herself as a replacement for Primrose because Primrose is too young, and Katniss would rather die than see her young sister die in the octagon, in the dome of the Hunger Games. So what happens is she puts herself in her sister's place. They're like, oh, okay, we'll take you. And then we see quite a bit of drama and crying, and then Katniss and her buddy Peeta are chosen as the tributes from that district, and they ride on this interstate railway. So they have a big rail project, right? It sounds like the EU, the Eurail. So when the EU came about, they got a Eurail, and I'm going to go ahead and say that as North America integrates, we're going to have an American rail, the AmRail. I'm already predicting it, the AmRail, which will be this high-speed rail and be sold as this great project. Don't you believe in the power of America and America's rail project? Look at our crumbling infrastructure. If we only had a great railway, we could all be connected, and it would be so awesome. This high-speed railway. AmRail. Well, we're a good ways away from that, but I can assure you that as the globalist plans march forward, that will be some sort of boondoggle that's used. Now, they're taken to the Capitol, and being poor members of the District of Kentucky, Tennessee, us Kentucky, Tennessee Southerners, well, we ain't never seen nothing like no city before, and we ain't seen no such delicacies of the like. And then we're here, like we don't know anything about what a city is in the South when there's cities with millions of people in the South. So they are brought to the Capitol. They arrive. There's all these delicacies. There's all this opulence, this over-the-top glam, glitz and glam rock has apparently taken over the year 2500. And everybody's dressed, as I said, everybody looks like RuPaul. It's kind of gross. And so very much out of their element, right? If you maybe grow up in the Ozarks or something, or the Appalachians, and then you've never been to New York City, and then you suddenly are plopped in the middle of Times Square, something comparable to this. So there they are, and they're about to learn about how things really work in the big city, and how decadent and depraved it can be. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. You're listening on talknetwork.com. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. We are breaking down the Hunger Games. You getting hungry? Well, you're about to get gamed, baby. Because we are talking catnip. J-Law. J-Law and her leaked photos. Oh, wait, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about Hunger Games. Film was made by Lionsgate. Lionsgate has made quite a few horror films, which is interesting. And the Gate of Lions could be Babylon. Hollywood, Babylon. If you're interested in the topic of Hollywood, Babylon, I have a pretty lengthy article titled Hollywood, Babylon, which you can find at jaysanalysis.com. Now, as we were saying, the tributes, Katniss and Peeta, have arrived in the capital city to participate in the Hunger Games as sacrifices for District 12. They find that imperial politics and media is much more sophisticated and complicated than they previously imagined. They had no idea of this whole world in their backwoods redneck country district of Tennessee and Kentucky. Arriving in the capital, political intrigue and imperial machinations take on a whole new meaning, and we discover that Katniss begins to learn how important propaganda is for managing her career as a tribute. She has to win sponsors to survive. She has to play the game of media hoaxery, if you will, right? And so when she's on that game show, or whatever the entertainment show is, and she comes out and they create this romance that's not actually there between her and Peeta. And as we move into the second film, and skipping past the whole enclosed dome battle royale American Gladiators scenario, of course, Peeta and Katniss do not die, but Katniss, sees the brutality of this up close, and she realizes that this is ultimately anti-human. It's harmful to her people, to the people of Panem as a whole. We also learned that there was an uprising of one of the districts after Katniss is kind of a hero from the Hunger Games scenario, because she won't kill PETA, right? They say, well, you get somebody, 2 men enter, 1 man leave, right? To use the Thunderdome. And so when Katniss is in the midst of the Thunderdome, she defies President Snow, says, I will not kill PETA, he's my BFF. I put PETA in the friend zone a long time ago. PETA tried to mac on me. He's secretly in my friend zone. The PETA game wasn't working because PETA was not using any game. And so Katniss feels bad for PETA. And so she won't kill him. So she starts a revolution. And one of the districts topples over something, and in comes the Imperial troops from the capital to smash everybody, of course. And so, as we close the first one, PETA and Katniss do make it out because President Snow realizes that he will have a PR nightmare if he upholds the rule to only allow one person to emerge victorious. And this will begin the power struggle between Katniss and President Snow that will occupy the rest of the story. Now, emerging victorious from these Hunger Games, we discover that there's going to be a new Hunger Games. And in the next round, it's going to be Katniss, PETA, or PETA may be actually taken away at this point, right? Because I get a little fuzzy on the spacing of this because it was years ago when I saw each of these in the series. I just saw the newest one out in the theater, but the point being here is that we do see some interesting symbology there in the Hunger Games arenas, because these arenas seem to be completely controlled environments, and that's fascinating because, like I said, very reminiscent of something like the Truman Show or Dark City, almost kind of platonic, where you have everybody sort of trapped in this environment and everything is completely controlled by the game master, the archons, right? And they can kind of create anything pop up out of the ground, genetically modified monkey dogs or whatever's running around. And so this is one of the ironies here, is that it's a future where there's almost no limits to the technology, it appears. So you can have this whole completely controlled environment where you can just create genetic modifications that pop out of the ground, yet all the rest of the districts live in poverty. So it doesn't really make much sense. But then again, men and powers don't make sense, because the world's not run that way. It's run by a lot of hoax, scam, and confidence men, right? That's how the world really works. And so Katniss has just about had enough, but she discovers that there's this insurrection, there's this rebellion. Actually, District 13 wasn't destroyed. They're kind of still hanging out and hiding in the rocks, and they are intent on bringing down Snow. And so she meets up with Philip Seymour Hoffman, what's his name, Seneca, one of the interesting references to Roman statesman here. I think he's Seneca, but Hoffman's character is neat because he's playing the role secretly of being chief geopolitical strategist for President Snow, and so he feeds President Snow a bunch of information, but secretly would discover, he's actually the leader of, or the co-leader of La Résistance, de la Révolution. And so he's playing a double game here, and this is where it does get a little more sophisticated and interesting, is that the films present some kind of true geopolitical truths about how things really operate in the world, with revolutionary movements and leftist movements and causes and propaganda. And I think when we get into parts 2 and 3, what's most interesting about those is the propaganda element. These films demonstrate and elucidate and highlight a lot about propaganda. So as Katniss was victorious in the Hunger Games and begins to figure out how propaganda works, as she moves into being more serious in her role as revolutionary emblem, icon, logo, right, with her little flaming bird thing. That flaming bird thing, interestingly, is directly from World War II, where this was a Nazi radio gunner badge. So make of that what you will. I don't get the impression that La Revolution in the Hunger Games is in any way Nazi, because they are quite egalitarian. It appears more so Marxist, communist to appearances, is all I'm saying. With something much more hierarchical, I guess you could say, going on in the empire. But then again, keep in mind that socialism and Marxism have been scams anyway. But it does appear that the Mockingjay is the same logo as the radio gunner badge. Just a fascinating little tidbit there, where Suzanne Collins might have gotten some of her symbology. Who knows? Now, what they want to implement with these kids is, and with the public as a whole, according to President Snow and his view of psyops propaganda, is a completely programmed to kill mindset. All right, so it's not really about like MK Ultra programmed assassins, although that does come up in the films and books. On the whole, it's actually showing that what the capital wants is a desensitized populace. Why? Well, because the desensitized populace won't care about the state coming and lopping your neighbors on the head and taking them off to prison or a gulag, right? Because if you don't have any concern or care for the lives of your neighbors and fellow countrymen, you're not going to care when the state comes to take them away, or decides to kill them, or decides to kill your whole neighborhood. Nobody's going to care. Why? Well, because you've been desensitized and there's no value to life. This is why the state loves to hammer into the populace the worthlessness of life. It's a psyop strategy. It's a political tactic of control, so that the power structure can maintain its power and stay in power, because nobody cares about anybody else's life except their own, maybe. And then ultimately these kinds of nihilistic imperial structures just eat themselves from within, because eventually if you don't care about anyone else's life, well, then your life doesn't matter either. And over time you kind of realize, well, I guess my life actually doesn't matter, and there's not even any point in me continuing on. The society collapses into nihilistic, self-destructive madness, right? That's what's going on, and that's very important to understand why imperial politics, in terms of their brutal pagan manifestations, requires human sacrifice, is because the sacrifice of the life of humans allows the state to take the energy and power of life into itself, as if it is God on earth. And so the state can then determine life and death. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and we are deconstructing the Hunger Games films, and somewhat the books too. There's quite a bit more in the books, I should add, than make it to the films. But only having read the first one, I can already tell that that's the case. But welcome back to Esoteric Hollywood. We're deconstructing the Hunger Games. Hunger Games. Are you hungry? Let me feed you with my esoteric knowledge, Seymour. Feed me, Seymour. Well, the Hunger Games. We're talking about how the capital runs everything through big scams. And we saw that the tributes are offered up as human sacrifices. This brutalizes the public and desensitizes them to the value of life. Sounds like America, doesn't it? With our garbage TV in Hollywood that desensitizes us to human life quite often. And the mindless patriotism involved in offering up our young men as tributes to go fight in wars that don't really have anything to do with us or our safety, but rather to do with the designs of elite oligarchs who want to make a buck. And not just a buck, but also to reorganize the globe for the New World Order. So we got to the point where Katniss, what did we get to? Katniss is, she's survived both of these Hunger Game scenarios, the gladiatorial games, and now she's part of this resistance with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Julianne Moore. And Julianne Moore quite often plays this bitchy sort of character, right? Bitchy, strong woman character. Watch out. Peter Malark has been captured by the Capitol and is being put under mind control. So he's been drugged up and strapped down, and they've got him as the MK Ultra assassin. We're going to find out. And so what's neat about this section of the storyline of the films is that we begin to see that the machinations of the Capitol are pretty sophisticated. In fact, they will even run fake news stories. Yes, the Capitol runs fake news stories about Katniss to try to destroy her reputation. Wow. Not only that, Katniss decides that for her own survival and for the survival of the Resistance, she will have to fake being in a relationship with PETA. Because keep in mind, they're celebrities, right? This is celebrity culture mixed with gladiatorial games. And wow, how close is this to reality? And in fact, if you watch quite a few Hollywood marriages are actually organized. They're actually put together. They're PR marriages. They're not really what they're presented as, and they're done for business purposes. So you're talking about industries that are dealing with millions of dollars in the pairing of some pseudo couple, Tomcat, right? Befflo. I don't know what was J-Lo and Affleck's term when they were together. Jacko and Lisa Marie. These kinds of things oftentimes are PR creations, believe it or not. Now, probably many in this audience know that, but a lot of people actually don't know that. And so you'll see these kinds of things come about when there's movies coming out that you might star the same two people, or a record album coming out that might star, or that might involve Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow, something like this, right? And this is just standard fare. This is just how it works, with so-called Hollywood, so-called royalty. Now, I'm not saying it's always the case, but I'm just saying that does happen. In fact, if you read, say, biographies of Jacko, Michael Jackson, it will discuss the hyperbaric chamber and the bubbles monkey thing. Those were all PR creations. Now, I'm not saying that Jacko wasn't kind of wacko, but the phenomena of the hyperbaric chamber and sleeping and all this stuff, these were things that Jacko and his PR people created to keep him in the news cycle, keep him in the tabloids. Because you have to understand, from the perspective of PR and Hollywood and all that, all publicity is good publicity because it's free marketing. It's just advertising. So if your name's in the tabloids all the time, that's that's free advertising, baby. That's everybody, every fat housewife in slippers and a muumuu and curlers buying, in the Inquirer and thinking about you. And what is that but just projecting one's image out into the ether to create the perception of power, the allure of the image of the star. All of which is concocted, all of which is a facade. And that's what's very fascinating, that Hunger Games is willing to reveal that. It's willing to show that. And it's not something that you typically see in young adult storylines and literature. And the Capitol, as we said, is not beyond faking news stories. They run this cycle of Katniss doing something that's not true, and then they recast the whole story to where Katniss and the Revolution are terrorists or something, and it's completely fake, completely staged. So what Katniss does is fight back with propaganda. So she fights back with creating the mythology and the story of her and Peeta and their love tryst and all of this, which is largely manufactured because, at least at this point from the films, Katniss and Peeta are not lovers. Katniss likes Gale, this other dude. From there, we see the growth of the Revolution, of the resistance, and they sort of somehow, I guess, obtain weapons and tanks, and or not tanks, whatever these flying things are, Blackhawks of the future, I guess. And they start gaining power, getting more people, joining the underground and so forth. And by the final two films, the resistance has begun to actually wage war on the Capitol. Now, Katniss originally was all for this. She was totally game. But then she starts realizing that, oh, wait a minute, the Capitol, or the resistance, is starting to take on the characteristics of the Capitol. And President Snow's organization, right? Julianne Moore starts becoming this kind of power-hungry, dictatorial bitch. So the girl power that we thought was going to come through the resistance and the egalitarianism of this anti-establishment movement and I guess the patriarchy of President Snow or something, takes on its own dark characteristic through Julianne Moore's character. And who that character is, it escapes me off the top of my head what her name is, but she has decided she's going to be heading up the resistance when they take down Snow. Now, Snow is ruthless and has engaged in all kinds of schemes, traps, and plots to try to take out Katniss and her team, none of which succeeds. Katniss is, of course, the badass girl power. And this highlights another theme that we've seen in so much of the young adult literature and films of late, is the idea of the great girl warrior, right? Or the heroine, right? This just girl power, girl power, girl power. No longer do we have Luke Skywalker. No, we have Lucy Skywalker, I guess. And if you've seen the trailers for the new Star Wars film, I guess it's a brother man stormtrooper and some chick, right? So I'm guessing this chick is going to be Han and Leia's daughter, perhaps, and she's going to have the Force. And so we got to get rid of those evil white men. They can't be heroes anymore. Maybe Walking Dead. We'll let you have Walking Dead. And you can have Rick, Carl. You can have Rick screaming out Carl on Walking Dead as the last white guy who's a hero. But that's it. You'll just get Walking Dead. No, I'm kidding. But we are seeing this push for, quite obviously, only having the chicks as these strong masculine heroes, right? And this is all portrayed as empowering women, and that's not at all what this is about. This is deep psyops to screw up gender. That's what this is really about. So, and for anyone who takes issue with that, I had people every now and then ask me, what's your problem with feminism? Why don't you like feminism? And I always say, well, do you know the history of feminism? Well, yeah, it's suffrage and the right to vote, blah, blah. No. The history of feminism is third wave feminism, especially, is funded by the Rockefellers explicitly to break up the family. Right, so you're told all this baloney. It's just like any other revolutionary movement. You're told all this baloney about what the source of your problems is, the oppression, or even the environment, the green movements, right? Environmental rights movements type stuff. You're told a bunch of baloney about what the problem is, and then you're given a false solution, and that's how you're played. That's how your hunger gained, right? And really, though, your hunger is for a masculine patriarch. That's your true hunger. Not to become a masculine patriarch as a woman. And then men are supposed to be emasculated, emaciated femboys who can't do anything. And simper and cower before girl power. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. We're breaking down the Hunger Games, and I'm feeding you. And speaking of propaganda and fake stuff, I was thinking about, remember when it was leaked about J Law's boobies, her iPhone, iCloud was hacked, along with other so-called starlets. And I bet that was a PR thing. I bet that was completely done on purpose. If I recall, it happened when Mockingjay 1 came out. So the leak of the boobies just happens to happen before the movies. Boobies to movies. There we go. And of course everybody ate this up, and everybody was like, oh, poor J Law, poor Jennifer Lawrence and her boobies everywhere. When she's like already shown her boobies in other movies anyway, so why is that like that big of a deal? All her privacy is violated. Well, guess what? Everybody's privacy is violated by the NSA. So you're going to be concerned about J Law's iCloud being hacked, but everybody's iCloud is already hacked. So it's complete nonsense, really. And that anybody would really believe that is a bit of a stretch. And supposedly, so the FBI is going to track down the guy who's hacking Jennifer Lawrence's iCloud. Come on. What about all the terror, right? We're supposed to be worried about terrorists everywhere, but the FBI has the time to track down who hacks into Jennifer Lawrence's iCloud. Misplaced priorities or complete staged baloney. You be the judge. You can guess which one I think is the case. So we are looking at the next phase here of the hungry people's revolution. The hunger revolution. And they begin, of course, having victories. They're taking down the Capitol. Snow's getting a little worried. He's trying all kinds of different plots, tricks, and scams. They're not working. And Katniss is getting a little pissed because the revolution is looking more and more like the Empire. They're acting like a bunch of corrupt scam artist buttholes that are trying to benefit from propaganda. And isn't it interesting that at the same time as all of this is going on, where Jennifer Lawrence in the film is being an emblem of propaganda and she's being used by the revolution, in real life, so-called Jennifer Lawrence is propaganda. Interesting. The threshold of fiction and fact become faction. Now, this is particularly evident when Katniss is engaging in different battles with the Revolution, and the Revolution says, you know what, we don't actually want to use you in battle anymore because you're our logo, you're our mascot, you're kind of like the Burger King guy. We want you to be in propaganda videos. And she's like, what? I'm like your best warrior. I'm Xena Warrior Princess, and you want me to be in your YouTube videos. And they're like, yes, we want to make YouTube videos of you walking around with rubble in the background, and we'll throw in some CGI and some fancy effects and some smoke and swirls and a phoenix and some flames, and you're going to be the bitch from the flames, baby. You're going to be the phoenix bitch from them flames. And Katniss is not happy about this because Katniss is a warrior princess. She's like Athena, right? And so this begins the downfall of Katniss's trust in the Revolution. And she starts to realize that if I win this war for the Revolution, then Julianne Moore's character, Queen Bitch of the Revolution, is going to take me out. She's going to sacrifice me because I'll be a great martyr, and that will allow her to step into power. Right? Very insightful in terms of, it makes me think of something like Game of Thrones, where we see these similar sorts of insights into courtly intrigues where the different thrones are vying for power, and characters like Lord Peter Baelish, the Littlefinger, Lord Peter Baelish, is busy in all these intrigues and spying and scamming for the crown and for Cersei and for others, and then ultimately for himself to gain power. Very similar, very similar. Same situation going on in Hunger Games. And, you know, if you read any history of royalty, Byzantine Empire, Byzantine plots and subterfuge, this is what you see. You see these same intrigues, and it's just nothing but conspiracies, plots, spies, and scams, and murders and assassinations. Right? I mean, that's this the whole of history, really. So all the more ironic for persons who have a hard time believing in so-called conspiracy theories when that's really the history of courts and empires perennially. Nothing new under the sun, as Solomon said. So we think of empires in the past, and I was just actually been reading famous work by Oxford guy named John Julian Norwich on Byzantium, and his history of Byzantium is, I guess, kind of the classic work on this period of history. And for most people in the West, there's very little knowledge of the history of Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire. It begins with Constantine and Constantinople, the new imperial city that Constantine creates. And when you read about Constantine's own life, he's stamping out his brother, stamping out his rivals. He eventually, I believe, even gets rid of his wife because of possible infidelity. We don't know for sure. But Constantine was all about a bunch of courtly intrigues. So this beginning of the Roman Empire in the East, the Byzantine Empire, is all bound up in this kind of stuff. So, it's nothing but, it's all conspiracies, and that's what's ironic for conspiracy deniers, is that they are really the people who are the most ignorant, living in the most brainwashed, probably the most brainwashed era of history, I would guess, because I would tend to think that people in past times had a lot more common sense, right? They had a lot more street sense. They knew when people were scamming them with some guy coming along with a snake oil and a train of circus performers behind him, and he tells you that the snake oil is going to give you eternal life and cure all your ailments, and everybody kind of knew, that guy's the snake oil salesman, just let him pass on through town, don't waste your money on that guy. He's a mountebank, a con man, and country folk, peasantry, tended to have common sense about this guy. But nowadays, because of TV, we are just completely bumfuzzled, and we have no idea what reality is. And if the mainstream media tells us that there's no such thing as geoengineering, yet when we look out our window and see airplanes spraying things, we will believe what the TV says even over what our eyes see out there in the world. And that's the power of TV and mass media. So, yeah, I mean, hard to say exactly what degree Suzanne Collins, has all this conspiracy so-called stuff in her mind, but certainly she's, looking at the history of empires, and that's all at play here. Another good book on this would be Michael Grant, who's a famous historian. He has a series on Rome and Greece, and I've read his books on both, and this is what you see, and it's not accidental that Suzanne Collins is naming characters after, Roman statesmen, Roman philosophers, historians, Seneca, Plutarch, right? So she's showing us that that's what the well from which she's drawing, and that lets us know that courtly intrigues and deceptions, plots, assassins, spies, again, is the norm of history. If you've read anything about the history of the British Empire, you'll know that it was all these same things, right? Queen Elizabeth had spies everywhere, and you'll see paintings of her pictured with wearing big dresses, and there are eyes all over her dress. Why is Elizabeth wearing a dress with a bunch of eyes? Well, because that represented her spy network, and they were everywhere, even amongst the peasantry, and people would rat on their neighbors for a small pence. This is the norm, right? This is what the brainwashed people of our day no longer understand. We're talking Hunger Games. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Be sure to check out MichiganMushrooms.net to get chaga mushrooms that will most likely, I believe, help your immune system. I think there are limitations on what I can say health-wise. Good stuff, though. And then get any of your other health supplies from j.talknetwork.com, because this show is listener-supported. It's you that keep me going, and we thank you. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. We've been breaking down the Hunger Games series, and we're moving up into the conclusion of it, the last couple installments. Billions of dollars made from this series, I feel sure, and not accidental that, as I said, we have this strong woman feminist type thing. Yeah, box office globally, I just checked here, $2.5 billion. It's the 19th highest grossing film franchise yet, and may make it up into the 3 billion category. So I'm sure eventually they're going to reach top 15 or 10 or so. So we were talking about the everything from the ritual murder of children, the bloodbath that the populace needs, right? And we have this cornucopia in the middle of this Hunger Games gladiatorial event. We've talked about how the state it's almost like their new Thanksgiving, kind of, right? And we talked about how the state is involved in brutalization. We've talked about how they utilize psyops, propaganda, fake news. It's almost like, Sandy Hook or something, like the Capitol is running Sandy Hook propaganda, literally, to take away gun rights, and then in Hunger Games, it's to quell any rebellion who are listed as terrorists. We've seen that the Capitol has the ability to basically create any kind of perfect environment with the Hunger Games Thunderdome or whatever, and rather than utilizing all this technology to better the districts in Panem, it's used for gladiatorial games. Now, it makes me think of the NFL or something, or the gladiatorial bread and circuses that we have, and we've seen how the youth are offered up for battle in the battle royale, and then how this parallels what happens with the U.S. and the fraudulent wars that are really about drug trafficking and nation reconstructing after we bomb them, based on the phony threats that the U.S. itself creates. The Western establishment creates those threats because they run the world from their banking background empire. So we've seen how it's all a big scam, and Katniss, over time begins to learn this. She's disgusted at the degeneracy that's involved in the Capitol. Everybody's fat, faggy, and living in opulence and decadence, and everybody else is poor, and this is all bad news. Katniss gets in with the rebellion. The rebellion is, we're discovering, not everything that it was cracked up to be either. And this is what we continually see in history with rebellious movements, revolutions, is that sometimes the revolution can actually be just as much or worse than the existing establishment. And The Guardian, interestingly, did a piece where they highlighted Donald Sutherland, who plays President Snow. And Sutherland says in this interview, quote, "I want Hunger Games to stir up revolution." The Guardian article reads, "The veteran actor who plays tyrannical President Coriolanus Snow in the blockbuster series talks about films as political activism, plus cinema villains and happy marriages." Interesting. Just a little bit more from this article. Donald Sutherland wants to stir revolt, real revolt, youth-led uprising. Right? Sounds like Mao's youth brigades against injustice, and in hopes that it will overturn the U.S. as we know it, in order to bring in a kinder, gentler way. I hope that they will take action, because it's getting drastic in the U.S. Drone strikes, corporate tax dodging, racism, the Keystone oil pipeline. Oh, yeah, that's a big danger, really. It's because it's all a bunch of scams. Food stamps, right? I mean, well, some of this is true. Donald's right about this, but the solution is not going to be the Occupy movement, right? It's not the commie socialists that are going to fix this, because the commie socialists all work for the establishment. So, Donald, if you thought about it, then think about Julianne Moore's character, your foil in the film, the leader of the revolution, right? Julianne Moore is just as bad or worse than you are, Donald. So Sutherland says the youth are consumed with cell phones and tweeting. Right, and it's the same establishment that funds the leftist movements via David Rockefeller, who like the youth being on cell phones and tweeting. Donald Sutherland says, we were true revolutionaries back in 1968. He says, we did it in 68. Well, Donald, actually nothing substantial happened in 1968, and the revolutions of the student movements were just as fake, phony, and CIA run as any sort of so-called revolution nowadays. And I'm sure that 30 years from now, J-Law, Jennifer Lawrence, will get on some Guardian website in an interview when she's a haggard old maid and will say something like, yeah, I was in a film, Hunger Games, and we were true revolutionaries and girl power, and we were putting down the patriarchy, and let me tell you, such girl power, and nothing happened, and it's just because all the kids in our day are inside the Matrix, Videodrome, because they have virtual reality chips implanted in their head, and they don't want to fight the real fight. Now, come on. When is anybody in this crop of actors, which is not going to happen, I'm being facetious here, right? These crop of actors are never ever going to talk about what's really going on. Now, every now and then, one of them will, and they get lambasted and lose any kind of future work they might have. But as long as you talk about some fake communist Marxist thing as an actor, no worries, you're good to go. But if you ever talk about David Rockefeller funding leftist movements, or if you make statements along the lines of Gary Oldman or Orson Welles or Marlon Brando, these will assure you of no longer being in movie roles. But feel free to promote feminism and Marxism, right? Because that's the fake revolution. So, yeah, a lot of people were making a big deal about Donald Sutherland's comments. And he's right about part of it. But what Donald Sutherland's comments show is that the film is talking about reality, right? That's true. He's trying to spin it into this Marxist thing, though, which, it's not the real solution, not a real revolution. And this is similar to what Mao would do when he stirred up the youth, the youth revolution and Maoism. It was all the same kind of stuff, right? Like, the system's unfair to you, and the elite, they're so bad, the establishment's so bad. Let me ride the waves of opportunist revolution. No. Don't fall for this stuff. Come on. Don't fall for this stuff. Demagogues have forever been out there to lead the people into a new corral of baloney. But the corral that they're leading you into is an establishment-funded corral. Okay? That's the thing. I always have to wonder where these people get their move. Where did the revolution get their money from, their power from? And even if you were to ever have some real so-called revolution, which I don't think is going to happen or ever happened really, then the revolution, you'll soon discover, just like any sort of organization, will be subject to all the same difficulties and problems that the revolution was created to solve to begin with. So the leaders of the revolution, like Julianne Moore, come to power, and what does she want to do? Oh, her idea is, let's do a false flag to make snow look bad. Katniss discovers, holy crap, my leader, who I was fighting against Snow's false flag terror, why, my leader wants to do false flag terror now. Well, shoot fire. Shoot fake fire, like my fake fire on my dress, right? Says Katniss. So this is the good geopolitical insight that we see here in the Hunger Games. And what is a false flag? Well, I should mention, I guess, briefly that false flag is a military tactic where one power group, power block, or state will stage a terror event and raise the flag of the opponent. So if we think of something like the Gulf of Tonkin, or if we think about something such as the USS Liberty, or if we think about the 9/11 attacks, or any of these sorts of big politically motivated events or attacks, it is appropriate to use the term false flag, because for those of us in the alternative research community, or those of us who have two brain cells to rub together, we know that what's presented in the mainstream media as who is the culprit is not generally the case. It's actually the existing power structure that has so much more to gain from such an event. Final segment at Esoteric Hollywood. We've been breaking down Hunger Games. Please go to MichiganMushrooms.net and get your chaga mushroom tea, and go to j.talknetwork.com and get all your organic supplements and products there, not from Walgreens and Walmart. Thank you. Also, if you like philosophy, if you like what you're hearing here, you can go deeper. And I offer philosophy lectures at jaysanalysis.com, where I work through the classics of Western philosophy apart from statist propaganda. So you'll deal with topics like Aristotle, topics like Plato's Republic, Plato's Dialogues, the Apology, right? And you get that for the lowly price of $4.95 a month, that you can subscribe at jaysanalysis.com. And I will send those lectures out to you privately in an email, and you can enjoy them for your auditory pleasure. Final segment here, looking at Hunger Games, and we've talked about propaganda, we've talked about all the machinations of the Empire, and the revelation that the revolution is turning into the Empire, right? So when they come to power, they end up engaging in all the same machinations that Snow was involved in. So they're doing false flag terror. This results in, of course, sadly, ultimately, Katniss's own sister Primrose being killed. Yes, the revolution does their own little false flag, and it ends up blowing up Primrose, and this inflames Katniss even further. And so Katniss has pretty much had enough. What does Katniss do? Well, she's got an arrow. She's going to shoot it into the heart of Snow, who's tied up in the big court square. And what does she do? She fires that arrow straight up at Julianne Moore, right? And so out with Julianne Moore. One of the other background advisors takes power, and Katniss has to flee back to her district. And so she ends up living in her little farmhouse estate with Peeta. We find out that Beta Peeta is the one who scores Katniss. I'm not exactly sure how this happens. Katniss just decides that Peeta really loves her, and because Peeta was sent by Snow to be an MK Ultra Mind Control assassin. Peeta was brainwashed. He's flipping in and out of dissociative states. He doesn't know what reality is. He tries a couple times to assassinate Katniss. Doesn't work, and then Katniss realizes, oh, he loves me. He's better than I thought he was. I don't like this other dude who I thought I liked. So I'm going to go back to District 12, the Kentucky, Tennessee area, and live out in the sticks with Peeta, and we're going to raise some kids. Now, what are we to make of all this? Well, good and bad, as I've said. A lot of insights into real geopolitics, as well as blending in propaganda and mainstream media. All these aspects were portrayed accurately in the Hunger Games series, as well as the disgusting nature of mass media and these so-called reality shows, which we probably will see in our lifetime something along the lines of The Running Man or the Hunger Games, a sort of battle royale where our own people will be offered up as tributes, probably be some kind of lottery system, quite literally something like Out of the Island, the Michael Bay film, something like we see in movies like The Giver or books like The Giver, some sort of lotto system where people are chosen as sacrificial victims, lambs, to go serve the centralized state. and there'll probably be some kind of gladiatorial event, and it'll literally be like the Running Man. That's my prediction, is that we will see that in our lifetime. And it'll be all tied up in propaganda, because some stuff like the UFC, Ultimate Fighting, it's not bloody enough. We want to see some real. Just imagine how much attention would be garnered if the contestants were actually putting their lives on the line. And there will be plenty of people willing to put their lives on the line for these kinds of spectacles, right? Just like the gladiators in Rome. And it'll be televised, and it'll be a big deal. It'll be like a death race. It'll be 24-hour Thunderdome TV, ThunderdomeTV.com. It'll have its own YouTube channel, and it'll be piped into everybody's sports bar. Everybody will be watching it from their sports bar as they drink GMO beer and become big old fat slugs. And then it'll just be a brain chip, and then you'll get like a direct beam signal from the Wi-Fi into your brain of the gladiatorial events. Welcome to the Thunderdome. 2 men enter, 1 man leave. So that's what we've seen with Hunger Games. And then, of course, I think we should highlight again the feminism here, pretty prevalent, not just because there's the strong female lead, but because it's geared towards young adults. And through all of these young adult series, many of them at least the ones that make it to the big screen, we're seeing this trend of the 17-year-old girl warrior. I mean, come on, seriously, how unrealistic. Could you imagine of putting like some 17-year-old girl on the front lines of battle somewhere? This is completely ridiculous, right? I mean, 99.9% would completely just melt, and they're going to be screaming, crying, running away. And to have this 17-year-old girl as the emblem of your high-tech warfare, people getting blown up, fighting genetically modified beasts, is utterly preposterous. And Katniss is kind of a bitch, right, throughout the series. She's, she's a strong, independent woman, and she's not worried about the boys, and she doesn't know which one she likes. And the guys are all fawning after her, which, sorry to break it to you, but most guys aren't fawning after Xena, the warrior princess. Guys like feminine women. They're not fawning after who's another I'm trying to think of some female warrior. Red Sonja, I don't know. Like Red Sonja is maybe some guys have a Red Sonja fantasy, I don't know, but I mean, this is just so divorced from reality. But then again, we don't have to be in reality, because this is the world of Hollywood, the world of make-believe, fiction, fantasy. But it's supposed to be about reality, according to Donald Sutherland, and it is. These tomboy hero girls is kind of this new thing now, and I really do think that this is military-industrial complex propaganda. This is what they want. They want feminized males and masculinized females. This is stated Department of Propaganda, Pentagon planning, which you can read about in the Rockefeller's biography, and you can read about the white paper documents that I mentioned earlier in the show with Planned Parenthood 1968-69 document on the promotion of homosexuality and feminism, and the State Department Memorandum 200 with Kissinger about the depopulation of what he says the third world, but guess what? He means you too. And that's why there are Planned Parenthood outlets set up in every major city, and they are funded by the state, and they're there to ensure that the population decreases. Now, and you think, oh, that's to target the blacks, the poor blacks. Oh, no. You see, you middle class and upper middle class white people, guess what? You're targets of all the same subversion. The water is drugged. The vaccines are drugged. The GMO food is drugged. The air is sprayed. Your environment is under attack, subversion, and inversion just as much as Native Americans or black environments were. It's just that the technique and the strategy and the propaganda is different for your niche of people, because it doesn't work the same for you, right? You have, for example, affordable health care. So the attack on you is going to come through affordable health care, such as vaccines, right? And through the Rockefeller established medicine system. That's going to target you, white people, all you dumb honkies. So what's the great takeaway from Hunger Games? Well, stop watching all your bread and circuses, because you are being used, and the capital is Washington, D.C., and they're running fake news. That's what I want to leave you with. And don't turn your 16-year-old girls into soldiers that are going to fight for America's war. That's not what the military is there for. They're there to go make sure that people in other countries die and their infrastructure is destroyed and rebuilt by billion-dollar defense contractors. So that's what they exist for. You've been listening to Esoteric Hollywood. This was my breakdown of the Hunger Games series. Please meditate on these things. These are serious issues, not to be taken lightly. And Hunger Games isn't all bad. It's not all good. I do have some criticisms. But if there's anything to take away from Hunger Games, it's the things that you heard tonight. Thank you, TalkNetwork.com. Thank you, Mike Adams. And be sure to check out jaysanalysis.com, as well as the other shows on TalkNetwork.com, and as well as my philosophy lectures at jaysanalysis.com. Thank you.